Welcome to 7 Investing Now, a show that teaches you how to take a long-term view on investing by better understanding what's happening in the market now.
Good afternoon, 7 investors, and welcome to the Monday edition of 7 Investing Now. My name is Daniel Brooks Kline, but you can call me Dan. My friends call me Dan. I'm joined today by Steve Symington, Austin Lieberman, and Max Chasko. Austin, how are things doing up in northern Florida? We got a really hot weekend, but it is cooling down to a more moderate 77 this week. How are things in a little bit north of here?
Can you hear me? I didn't test my sound. All right, good. Hey, everybody. It's absolutely gorgeous here. The weather's perfect. If it's snowing where you're at, wherever you live in the world, I just want to rub it in that it's beautiful in Florida right now.
Steve, did you shovel out, or are you hibernating for the winter?
That was definitely directed at me, wasn't it? It's a muggy 37 up here, but it's raining, so makes it even better. But that's how we go in Montana.
And Max, a little bit in between in Pittsburgh. Is it raining cheesesteaks? I'm not sure what the weather's like in Pittsburgh.
Yeah, just rain and cloudy, and it gets dark at 2 p.m. here now, so it's kind of depressing in Pittsburgh. But the Steelers are 9-0, so woo!
And the Patriots are back from the dead. Don't count us out. 4-5 heading into Houston. We're going to be 5-5. Don't count this team out. But guys, we are not going to talk football. We are not going to talk cheesesteaks. I mean, we might talk cheesesteaks a little, but we're not going to talk cheesesteaks a lot. What we're going to talk about, and frankly, what's been the theme of this show for weeks, or it feels that way, is vaccines. Max, we got a second vaccine today. More good news. This one is like 94% effective. What does this change?
Yeah, so last Monday, Pfizer and its partner BioNTech released preliminary results saying that their vaccine candidate for SARS-CoV-2 was over 90% effective. Today, a week later, Moderna, which is a US-based company based on the same technology, messenger RNA or mRNA, released some preliminary data showing that their vaccine candidate is also over 90% effective. And they actually put a specific number on it, which was 94.5%. BioNTech and Pfizer did not put a specific number on it, but due to the statistical analysis, it would actually be higher than 94.5%. But what does this change in the grand scheme of things? Not a whole lot. We kind of expected to have multiple vaccine candidates available, so this is good. They're both way more effective than we were willing to accept. This spring, this summer, governments, given the circumstances, we were talking, we can get by if a vaccine's 60 or 70% effective. So over 90% is really good.
So Max, the Pfizer vaccine needs to be kept really cold. I forget what the number is, -30, -50, -80, something like that. What are the storage needs for the Moderna vaccine?
Yeah, so Pfizer and BioNTech, if they want to keep their product viable for 6 months, it has to be stored at -70 degrees Celsius. So that's about -94 degrees Fahrenheit. Gotta love the metric system, right? Moderna can keep its vaccine candidate viable at 6 months on only -20 degrees Celsius, which is, what is that? -4 degrees Fahrenheit. So it's a little bit easier to work with in terms of the logistics of that. And it can be kept in a regular refrigerator, which is what most distribution centers would have, whether that's, a pharmacy or a hospital. It can be kept in a normal refrigerator for 30 days. So that's a lot easier to work with in terms of distribution and logistics. And it also helps because both of these, BioNTech and Moderna, the vaccines require 2 doses 28 days apart. So if you can keep a product viable for 30 days in a normal refrigerator, then you can potentially, treat the same individuals with the same, container of vaccines. Whereas for the BioNTech and Pfizer vaccine, it was only like 5 days at normal refrigerator temperatures. And you could maybe stretch that to 15 days, but then you can only open the container twice a day. So that could create some really interesting logistics in terms of, long lines forming and then turning people away. And, we can only open this at 8 a.m. every day or whatever, right? And then again at 5 p.m. or something. So the Moderna vaccine has a lot more friendlier, logistics. metrics.
So we're going to get to Austin and Steve and what this means for sort of the market, for real life. But I wanted to ask Max one follow-up question. I also wanted to remind you that whatever platform you're watching this, if you're on Twitter, if you're on Facebook, you're on YouTube, you can share questions with us. And in theory, I will see them in the chat. I say in theory because it's not a foolproof system. But Max, what else is coming down the pike? Are we going to have 8 or 9 vaccines? And I'm going to, it's going to be like Baskin Robbins where I can go to the doctor and pick, which one I want?
Yeah, I can't say if every vaccine is going to be available in every location, but we do have multiple vaccines. So we had a graphic. I don't know if we can throw that up.
Sam Bailey, feel free to share our vaccine graphic.
So I made this graphic with Manisha Samy. She's our newest lead advisor, also the youngest and the smartest lead advisor we have. Her and I are going to be tackling biotech here for 7 Investing. So we made this graphic to show the different cold chain storage of different vaccine candidates. So as you can see, there's quite a lot of vaccine candidates that are in development. BioNTech has, very cold. That's negative 70 degrees Celsius, but most are, easier to work with. Moderna, of course, at negative 20, and this is for 6 months. All the other ones can be viable at normal refrigerator temperatures or even at room temperature for a couple of vaccine candidates. So we are going to have multiple, perhaps many vaccines to choose from. And again, some of these are based on different technology. So, with Moderna and BioNTech, mRNA, just how that works specifically for these two, you need 2 doses, 28 days apart. So that also affects manufacturing, right? Moderna says it's going to have 20 million doses by the end of 2020, but that would only be enough for 10 million individuals. And then next year, in 2021, it says it's going to have enough manufacturing capacity for 500 million to 1 billion doses. But again, you have to divide that by 2 to see how many people that could treat. So that's 250 million people or maybe 500 million people. Other things to keep in mind, we haven't done studies yet in children or adolescents. So children and adolescents will not be getting these vaccines first. We have to run additional safety trials to see if these vaccines are equally effective and safe in younger human beings. So, they might not be able to get a vaccine until, next summer or the end of 2021. So that's something to keep in mind as well.
So Max, Moderna's actually said they're going to start testing on teens right away. And Daniel Johnson is asking where can we download the graphic? That graphic is on the @7investing Twitter. It's also on Max's Twitter. I've shared it on my Twitter. I'm going to guess everybody on the team has shared it on Twitter. But feel free to keep getting your questions in. And my light just went out, so apologies for getting darker. One last question, Max. You mentioned that these are mRNA based vaccines. Are there any other mRNA vaccines on the list? Because you were pretty confident this one was going to work.
Yeah, there's a couple other ones. So Translate Bio, I don't know if we can put the graphic up one more time, but that was partnered with Sanofi. So they're on the very far left of that. They need the coldest requirement for 6 months storage. That's negative 80 degrees Celsius. That one, just due to how cold that needs, probably even if it's effective and safe, not going to be used very often. And then there's another Arcturus Therapeutics. They're using using mRNA, but it works a bit differently with self-replication. So they can use a smaller dose, and they only need 1 dose potentially. So that could have a huge advantage in terms of distribution and logistics.
Good morning back to you, Doris and Renee Carell. Steve Symington, negative 80, you could just store it outside in another month or two. But so let's talk about the market. I've joked a lot. My bags are packed. I am ready to get in an airplane. I am ready to get in a cruise ship. That's kind of how the market is reacting. But that's not the reality of this. We're not going to have a vaccine tomorrow. Steve, should we be buying travel stock? Is it time to buy airlines? I personally think it's never time to buy airlines, but what are your thoughts there?
I'm not entirely convinced it's time to buy travel stocks in mass. The funny thing is when you look at most travel stocks, a lot of them, the best in class stocks have already rebounded to pre-pandemic levels. So I think if you want to buy travel stocks, you do so selectively and you find best in breed companies that will continue to thrive. But I think we're going to get some more volatility kind of as the news ebbs and flows when it comes to the vaccine and the current state of the pandemic and whether states are going to be issuing more lockdowns and restrictions and such. So it's going to be an interesting next couple of months, but I'm staying away personally
Yeah, and I would argue strongly, Steve, don't invest for the next couple of months. That and I don't mean don't put money in the market. I mean what you invest in have a much longer term, and really look at that. There's going to be volatility. There are a lot of states that have closed restaurants. Let's say the cruise industry. I actually just got an email from Royal Caribbean that hey, do you want to sign up to be a test person? Well. Taking test cruises versus getting cruises that are profitable, that might be 6 months. It might be a year because there might be a vaccine, but until people get it, they're not necessarily going to get in a plane. There's a lot to happen here. We're going to come back to Max to close this out, but I wanted to get to Austin on something. Austin, do you think the vaccine changes anything for stay-at-home stocks? We do meetings over Zoom. We use Slack. We use Trello, not a publicly traded company, but a lot of people are on Microsoft Teams. Does anything change? We've seen these stocks take a bit of a hit in the last couple of weeks.
Again, so everything we're seeing in the market right now is about short-term expectations and short-term price movements, whether it's with travel companies or cloud companies or whatever. This changes absolutely nothing about the shift that was already happening before COVID that has been accelerated by COVID into more technology, every company having to have a digital strategy, and then the tools and technologies that enable that and make companies be able to bounce back from things like COVID or the next unplanned emergency that is guaranteed to happen at some point. It doesn't change anything about that acceleration. It just changes, in my opinion, the short-term price, which if we're investing for the long term, like you just said, Dan, we should be owning companies that we want to own for 3, 5, 10 years. And if we do that, we can be wrong about the price on the short term. One warning is, watch out for companies that may have gone up with the Zooms of the world that don't really deserve, like their business hasn't gotten that much better, but they have just benefited from the rise in some of these stay-at-home companies, if you will. Stay away from those or watch out for them. And that's why. Yeah,
Max, I call it the off-brand paper towel syndrome. So like during the height of the pandemic, the people at Brawny were like high-fiving all day, like the Viva paper towel people, because you were buying whatever you could have. That's happened in the stock market. There are businesses that are not great businesses. We're going to talk about one of those a little bit in Steve's segment, Uber Eats. We're going to talk about Uber in general, but obviously, there's heavier use of the fairly crummy product that is Uber Eats because of the pandemic. You're seeing that in other places, so be careful of that. Look at the long-term prospects of the company and decide whether it's good or not. And testing, and Victor brings this up, I just saw in the news that one of the airlines is testing passengers prior to getting on the plane and only boarding those who test negative. I actually think testing / proof of a vaccine is probably going to become more the norm. Max, how hard is it to ramp up that capacity?
For testing or
for both? I mean, a vaccine could be as simple as I have a sticker on my license that says I got vaccinated or some other method of showing it. But the cruise lines are actually building testing facilities at their terminals and labs on their ships. How practical is that to do at like every airline gate?
Yeah, so some of the testing that we do, or even like, maybe you've gone to like anywhere, I don't know, at my barber, for instance, they do like a temperature check and they have to sign a waiver saying, I haven't gone out of the country in 14 days or whatever, right? Those aren't really effective at squashing this or detecting people who have it because you can be asymptomatic, and that's actually most individuals. So, and even the testing, I mean, you can test negative and still have, an infection. So it's kind of a silly way to go about it. It's like a false sense of security, really, in my mind, and increasingly in the eyes of the CDC, if you read what they're putting out. As far as, proving you have been vaccinated, I mean, I can see that catching on. That might be a little crazy with some of the, personal privacy concerns, right? I mean, I don't know, that could get a little weird, but I can see that happening, at least in the next year or two.
So Max, is multiple negative tests generally a good indicator? Like, I know my brother is flying home to see my mother over Thanksgiving, and he's been tested 3 or 4 times leading up to that. If you test negatively repeatedly and are not exposing yourself to sort of, let's call it dangerous behavior, you're not going out, you're largely quarantining, is a negative test generally a good indicator in that case?
Yeah, I mean, all the tests are different. There's different quality at different labs depending on who's getting the results. So I'm not going to say anything's 100% certain. But I mean, look right now, which is another thing with if the market gets carried away with good news on vaccine candidates, we still have record cases right now. So we still have to make it through the winter. The worst could be ahead of us in terms of the caseload and hospitalizations. I don't think any like states or counties or cities are necessarily going to go full on lockdown like we did in March and April, but we could see reduced restaurant capacity here and there. Yeah, I mean it's going to take time to get over this.
Final question. I'll give Harshal the last word, and then we're going to talk and pivot to talking about space. There was actually a launch yesterday that I could have seen if I just looked up. But Harshal asks, do you think CVS and Walgreens are prepared for administering vaccines? Clearly, Max, they do administer vaccines now, but I don't think they're ready for the rush. What are your thoughts there?
Yeah, so we were talking about this in our Slack channel internally here the other day. So the federal government's given $10 billion to companies and research institutions for research purposes to develop, one of these vaccine candidates. The federal government's given only $340 million to all the cities and states to handle logistics of distribution. So we could see some bottlenecks pretty easily. I mean, even in places like I live in Pittsburgh, we have one of the best healthcare, industries in the whole world. And I'm not sure we're really prepared necessarily to distribute this smoothly at first. For pharmacies like CVS and Walgreens, they might have vaccines available, but I think it's going to be on a case-by-case basis. It depends on where you are. Places in cities might have more access than rural pharmacies. And again, this comes out of capacity. Does your local Walgreens or CVS have a huge fridge capacity to store many of these doses? Like maybe not, right? So we haven't really even talked about this. That's one of the big question marks in terms of how is this going to be distributed in the United States. So this could be a big potential bottleneck. But I think you probably have to go to a hospital or some larger space. Maybe a convention center gets converted to just do like mass vaccinations. I can see that happening.
Max, I don't know anyone in charge, but I'm going to suggest alphabetical by first name starting with D. Just not trying to be too picky, but no, obviously, here in Florida, they have to figure out, can they go into some of the senior facilities? Will healthcare workers get it first? Because if our healthcare workers stay safe, we're obviously in a better position. But we're going to pivot a little bit. So yesterday in our Slack, our colleague Matt Cochran shared footage of the SpaceX launch. And I was watching it on TV without thinking about the fact that I live in Florida, not that far from Matt. And if you looked up, you could actually see it. He posted photos that a friend of his took. Austin, this is kind of good news for the commercial space business, specifically Virgin Galactic as well. You wanted to discuss.
Yeah, well, the space industry is moving so fast, and COVID in a way has harmed the industry, but in a way it long term, it doesn't really matter. Everything is indicating that there's more companies getting interested. There's more investment in it, and there's more collaborations and partnerships, even with governments and NASA specifically. And when we think about the future, when we think about climate change, when we think about communications, we are going to see more activity in space. There's satellites going up every day to increase internet connectivity and stuff. So real quick, November 10th. SpaceX had an announcement. Years of design, development, and testing have culminated in NASA officially certifying the first commercial spacecraft system in history, capable of transporting humans to and from the International Space Station. That was part of basically their certification for that flight that we just saw. What was it? Yesterday? I think it was yesterday. And from NASA, there's a quote from Jim Bridenstine, NASA administrator. I'm extremely proud to say we are returning regular human spaceflight launches to American soil on an American rocket and spacecraft. So yesterday, that culminated in the SpaceX launch. And the incredible thing, if you've seen SpaceX launches, is that they're able to reuse rockets and they land the boosters back down and everything is reusable, which has reduced the cost phenomenally. So I bring SpaceX up because there's a publicly traded company, Virgin Galactic, that is not as focused on government contracts and flying humans on rockets to space right now, but they are working on recreational space travel. They're working on hypersonic travel, and they just delayed their key certification mission, which is going to allow them to fly passengers in space. And so that has essentially pushed back when they're going to be able to actually start collecting revenue, which was thought to be Q1 of next year. It could be beyond that. And so the question for me, I own shares of Virgin Galactic, ticker SPCE. What does this mean for the investment thesis, the investment perspective? And in my opinion, I don't know if I just lost you or not, but I got a notification on Restream. Anyways, in my opinion, this doesn't change the investment thesis for Virgin Galactic. If we own the company, it's a small position for me. We have to be ready for these delays, and it's about the broader industry.
Let me jump in a little bit here. So Virgin Galactic, their business model is they charge $300,000 for an 18-minute space flight. It's a low orbit. You're weightless for a couple of minutes. To me, it feels like a gigantic scam. But they are telling you what it is. They are telling you that people will pay for it. That being said, is their real business proposition ultimately bringing things to actual space and doing more what SpaceX is focusing on?
Yeah. So I don't own shares of Virgin Galactic because I think people are going to happily pay $300,000 for an 18-minute flight in space. I own shares because they've got multiple arms of the business. They produce space vehicles. They had a lot of data and technology through all this testing. I think there's a lot of optionality in the future. Maybe they build spacecraft for other people. They license design out. They license building it out, or hypersonic travel, which is basically flying low orbit in space to be able to travel from one place, say the United States, to Japan or anywhere internationally within a few hours versus 8 to 10 to 18 hours or however long it might take. There's going to be, I believe, a bright future there. And then, yes, they could also potentially get into launching satellites and things like that. They have a unique perspective. They take off horizontally versus rockets that take off vertically. Virgin Galactic's, the economics of taking off horizontally, it's a lot cheaper to do that than to use all the fuel. So it's better for the environment. It's cheaper to launch. So if we own the company, which I do, this is not about the $300,000 flight and getting people into space. It's about the optionality that comes with the business beyond that. It's a small position, though, because it's risky.
So you're going to hear us say this over and over again, but if you invest in a company like this, you're doing it for 5 to 10 years from now. You're not doing, don't even look at the stock price. It doesn't matter. What happens with short-term delays, you are buying this based on the long-term potential. And you are, of course, watching 7 Investing Now. We're doing what we're watching. That's when each of us brings a story to the table, and we sort of go around the room. We're not going to go to Max because the story he's watching is the vaccine, but we are later going to get to him with some of the questions in the queue. Steve, before we get to your stories, of course, talking about Uber and a big move they're going to make, this show, 7 Investing Now, it's brought to you by 7 Investing. We are a subscription-based service. You give us $17 a month or $170 a year, and that's on a credit card. Don't just hand Steve $170 if you see him. Certainly don't hand it to Max or Austin. That's not going to work at all.
I'll take it. Give it to me.
You want to subscribe on our website. And Steve, in addition to our 7 picks a month, we each pick our highest conviction stock, and we do a write-up, a big 2,000-word write-up. We all present to each other, and say, hey, these are our cases, and we'll ask questions, and we'll pretend we know what Max is talking about. Now that we have Manisha, we'll know if, we'll get the good questions in. But Steve, what else do they get in addition to those stock picks?
Well, the write-up might be closer to 3,000 words if you're Austin, Matt, or, you maybe, but it's, and I'm the one editing, so that's a good time. But you get access to us. Shop, answer investing questions. That's something a lot of people don't know, is that we're constantly interacting with our subscribers. We provide continuous updates on our companies as well. And this isn't just you get picks and you move on. We're all working to become better investors together, and we are looking for companies that will win over the long term. And that's what we do at 7 Investing.
It is a very intimate environment. We're doing our new members call on Friday. We're going to follow that by kind of an Ask Us Anything. We'll give a little bit of a little bit of an update on some of the companies we've picked, and then members can just throw questions at us. It is a lot of fun for us. We hope you join. We hope you tell a friend. Let's get back to the program. Steve, you're what we're watching. Is Uber. They're in talks to sell its self-driving unit to a competitor, to Aurora. Why are they doing this?
Right. So they're reportedly in talks to sell their ATG unit, that's their advanced technology group, to a competitor. I think it's Aurora Innovations. They're a self-driving vehicle startup. They're working on kind of a full software or a full stack for self-driving, this sort of infrastructure. So they're interesting by themselves. They're not publicly traded, but Uber's segment, the ATG segment, was valued at more than $7 billion as recently as July, after pulling in another $1 billion investment from investors that included Toyota and SoftBank. But it's also a big money loser for Uber. The segment incurred a net loss, I think, over $300 million so far in 2020. It's really R&D heavy, generating minimal revenue for Uber right now. But at the same time, earlier this year, many investors and analysts viewed the ATG segment for Uber as key to helping it reach sustained profitability. And that's largely because Uber's actual drivers are their single biggest expense. And I think they take, 80% of every ride's fee. So, I mean, I've never been overly fond of Uber's economics anyway, from an investment standpoint, but remove ATG from the equation and its long-term promise really makes me even less enthusiastic about Uber as a publicly traded company.
Let me jump in. Do not go out and buy Aurora Cannabis based on this. That is not the company
Do
we're
not
talking
confuse
about
the two,
here.
yeah.
But isn't this kind of like them selling their future? I mean, Uber's a bad business. I don't like the model. I think they undercharge. I think Uber Eats is super inefficient. It also has terrible customer service. And self-driving was ultimately, that was the holy grail. And they're going to cash it in for some short-term liquidity.
Right. And that's kind of what kills me about it. It reminds me, there's a lot of different cases where you buy a company because of the optionality that they have with some of their up and coming segments. I'm reminded of GoPro with their big bet on drones that they eventually backed out of because they said the economics weren't great. And that basically gave everybody one less reason to own them. But it's one of those things where they take away a potential accelerant for the business and take away yet another reason to do it. So again, this is just me personally. Uber, I think, is trading near an all-time high on anticipation of the economy reopening and then benefiting. But I personally don't like the economics, and I'm not a buyer.
Yeah, I love the product. They could charge me 50% more and I'd be fine with it. That is a problem in a business. Lee Schaefer asks, why is Moderna stock so cheap? I thought it would skyrocket. Max, I'm not buying anything based on the coronavirus or cures or anything like that. But Max, do you think Moderna is undervalued?
No. So Moderna's up like 9% today. It's valued at $38 billion. I don't think that's cheap for a company that's, before the pandemic, was losing like $500 million a year, doesn't have any approved products, no mRNA drugs ever been approved. And even, I don't think the pandemic's going to change much. I think it's still going to be a pretty bad business in terms of operating metrics. So I'm with you. I'm not chasing any company that's just playing the pandemic or, I want something that's more sustainable for the long haul. And that could be Moderna. Maybe it turns us into, more visibility into its platform. But some of its other indications, like in cancer, for instance, are going to be more difficult to work.
Mark Fitzgerald is very succinct in saying no way. And I agree. It's a vaccine you're going to sell at cost plus like 5% that it might be needed for 2 years. It is not a game changer. Don't chase the home run. Buy good companies and hold them. Max.
If I can add too, a lot of these coronavirus vaccines, they're targeting the spike protein on the specific strain. But that should actually work against almost like most coronaviruses that have pandemic potential, because every coronavirus strain that has pandemic potential uses that spike protein, right? So these vaccines that are coming out, this year, next year, would have worked and will work against the original SARS strain and even MERS, most likely, right? They have pan strain potential, it's called. So the likelihood that, the coronavirus mutates and that these vaccines are ineffective is very low. So it's not like we're going to have to keep coming back to the well to update these vaccine candidates, 5 years from now. I don't think that's very likely.
So, Steve, just to recap there, don't eat the MERS I sent you until you have the vaccine. You want to be really, really careful. Mark Fitzgerald says, and he brings this up, and I think it's a good point. He owned shares of Moderna before COVID was a thing. And due to this spike, it went up to a very high number, went up to 90. He bought it at $16. That is sometimes a time to sell. If your thesis was this is going to be a very good company over the long term, but it spikes to a crazy number, because of something short term, that might be a time to say, okay, I don't want to wait the 20 years it's going to take to kind of justify this. So that is a time. We always say never sell, but that might be a time it's time to sell. Guys, we haven't figured out what to call the next to last segment of the show. Matt Cochran suggested setup man, the guy that goes in before your closer in baseball. But today I wanted to hit everybody. We're going to start with Steve with one big question. So let me make a statement. We can see an end to the pandemic. We don't know when that end's going to be, but a year from now, probably no pandemic. Steve, what do you think will be a lasting change from what we've all gone through? And what do you think goes right back to normal?
Oh, man. That's such a loaded question. I think lasting changes, I think this has made internet plays and e-commerce plays specifically stronger. I think it's accelerated e-commerce and related names, and I think that doesn't change. We don't go in reverse after the pandemic wanes. So I think that applies to, big e-commerce companies and small e-commerce kind of up-and-comers alike, and companies like network, surrounding that network infrastructure plays and such. But I don't think we see a slowdown after the pandemic goes away for e-commerce and internet tech specifically. As far as what will go right back to normal, I don't know if I have an answer to that. It's that life, some life will sort of go back to normal, but I'm just going to decline to answer the second half of that question for now.
Let me predict for the first part before I throw it to Austin. The death of the suit. We are not going back to wearing suits aside from weddings and funerals. Austin Lieberman, your thoughts here.
I think virtual healthcare is it was already on the brink of being accepted, and now it has been. There's been regulations passed to make it basically easier, and like doctors can see patients cross borders and things like that. I think that's going to continue, and it just makes so much sense to open up healthcare across state lines and borders and things like that. So I think that's going to continue. Going back to normal, I think we will have in-person gatherings. So I think live sports, live concerts, things like that are some way somehow going to go back to normal-ish, where they're at least happening and people are gathering together.
And Max, I'll give you the last word before we move on and hit our finisher here. Max.
Yeah, so I think I'm not willing to say that this is going to be over in 2021. I think a lot of things have to go really well in order for that to happen. But certainly by 2022, I think it's feasible. But I think almost everything kind of goes back to normal. I know, Dan, you're probably itching like me to get out and maybe go to a playoff hockey or just a bar or somewhere, casino, something like that. So I think a lot of people are feeling the same way. And, sporting events, like Austin said, I think a lot of things are going to go back to normal. I think some of the things will stay. Like we talked about this on earlier shows with, are we going to fly across the country for that, 2-hour meeting? Probably not. But I think you're still going to have travel and all that. So.
Yeah, I cannot wait to be sitting in Madison Square Garden. The Rangers are on the way up. They're looking good. A concert. I've been in casinos, but being in a casino where I'm wearing a mask and don't move that much, where there's plexiglass between everybody, it's a fine experience. Look, I was at Epcot this weekend, so it's not like I'm sheltering in place, but socially distanced Walt Disney World is very different than regular Walt Disney World. Like, some of the very unpopular things like the Mexico Pavilion at Epcot had like a 30-minute wait to get in because there's air conditioning inside and there's a limited capacity. Those are the things that I do think are going to pop back. We're going to go to restaurants. Something else that I think that's here forever is if we think I have a cold, I think a lot of us are going to wear masks. And I don't think that's a bad thing. If being a little bit more considerate of others, the other thing I think that is here to stay is, let's call it distance learning. I don't think schools are going to go to like a full distance model, but I think if you have the sniffles and don't feel well, you're going to have the option of going to class digitally, and they're going to be able to take attendance. They're going to be able to do the things, or maybe you have a doctor's appointment during the day as a kid where you can miss 1 or 2 classes, but go to the rest of the day. I think that kind of stuff is here, and it is going to stay. But guys, it is now time to hit our finisher. And Josh, we thank you. He says, you guys rocks. You guys rock. Thank you for what you do. Thank you for watching. We appreciate it. Which company will have the biggest impact on healthcare? 1,350 of you voted. Almost half of you said Apple. 16.8% said Amazon. 24.6% said Google. That would be Alphabet, which I spelled incorrectly. And 9.1% of you, or maybe it wasn't me. No, I did this poll, even though it's under the 7 Investing. And 9.1% of you say Microsoft. Guys, I'm inclined to say Apple as well because of the Apple Watch, but I actually wouldn't be surprised by any of the 4 on here. Austin, I'll let you take this one first.
Teladoc.
Wasn't a choice. That we all know Teladoc is part of a revolution here, but it's really who's going to do something entirely different. And Teladoc might be part of what Amazon and Google are doing.
Yeah, I think in all seriousness, I voted for Apple. I think what they're getting into with health and their watch and all that stuff, even earbuds eventually could be used. I was trying to show you how cool I am because I have my earbuds on. Those could be used in some healthcare capacity. So Apple, that's what I voted for.
Are those actual Apple AirPods, or are they like mine where I have like Flapple Mearpods?
These are the real deal. All right, I don't go for the fake stuff, Dan.
Mine were $14.99. I've lost all sorts of them. Steve, your thoughts here?
Your fair pods. I think it's ironic that we left an E out of Alphabet. But hey, that's Twitter's edit button for you. I voted for Alphabet, and that was. They've long had so many different healthcare initiatives, and they've got a lot going on, more than most people know. And I think if anything, from their moonshot initiatives, and then just the power they have with search and their ability to compile and present and understand data, I think Alphabet is going to be there. So
that typo was brought to you by Dan's constrained vision post laser eye surgery. I cannot focus particularly well in the medium range. I also don't know why my plug-in light keeps going out, so apologies for that. Max, you're the only one who actually has any medical knowledge here. Do you think any of these companies, look, I think they might actually change health insurance as much as anything else. Max, your thoughts?
Yeah, Dan, so I'm here to tell you guys you're all wrong. It's actually Microsoft is going to have the biggest impact on healthcare. And that's because it's not very obvious, but their machine learning platform, Azure, and their cloud computing, it's actually powering a lot of these, high throughput laboratories where research and development are conducted. A lot of synthetic biology companies are using it. So it's something that's really going to shorten the timeline of development down from years to months, maybe even weeks, later on in the future. It's going to help a tremendous amount, making everything from vaccines to industrial microbes, things that are going to help have broad, large impacts on healthcare. So Microsoft.
So I am very excited for Dr. Clippy. I think that's what we're going to get, or possibly Microsoft Bob being repurposed for medical purposes. Guys, there are difficulties afoot, but we got through it. This was an exciting show. I'm looking forward to 6 months from now. Maybe 8 months, maybe 10 months, when we don't have to talk about vaccines and we can talk about things like growing businesses, sporting events are like, but that's not going to be the case for a while. That finishes up today's edition of 7 Investing Now. If you have questions for us, we are really, really easy to get a hold of. You could send an email to info@7investing. That's the number 7investing.com. Or you can reach out to us on Twitter @7investing. We try really hard to respond. So if we don't respond, hit us again, or certainly hit our personal Twitters as well. Guys, that's it. We're done. For Austin Lieberman, for Steve Symington, for Max Chatsko, I'm Dan Kline. Thank you for watching.